kingdoms on the Nile. What was the secret of the Sacred Mountain? Archaeologist Timothy Kendall was frustrated. He had climbed to the top of Jebel Barkal, a steep-sided, flat-topped sacred mountain that rose from the plain near the River Nile in Sudan, south of Egypt. From there, he could see inscriptions at the top of the tall, thin rock spire next to the mountain, but he could not make them out. Kendall hoped that they might hold clues about the Nubians, Africans, who ruled an empire so powerful that at times it included ancient Egypt. A worker reads hieroglyphics in the tomb of Pianki, a Nubian king who ruled Egypt in the 8th century BC. The Egyptians called the Nubians Kushites. Ancient kingdoms, 3100 BC to AD 25, 3000, 2000, 1000, BC 0, AD. There was a line of deep holes cut into the cliff that might once have held ropes for a suspension bridge across the gap. For Kendall, however, there was only one way to study the mysterious inscriptions, by climbing the dizzying rock. Kendall had to be patient. The climb was so difficult that he needed mountaineering lessons. He returned to Jebel Barkal a year later, in 1987. With an experienced climber to help him, he managed to climb the peak. Almost at once, he found something more interesting than the inscriptions. Bronze nails were poking out of some small, evenly spaced holes in some rock. Kendall had seen a similar group of holes and nails in Egypt. That they had been used to attach sheets of gold to a surface. Perhaps the nails at Jebel Barkal had been used for the same purpose. If the rock spire at Jebel Barkal had been covered with a sheet of gold, the rising sun each morning would have reflected off it in a golden beam across the desert. That would fit well with the Nubians' worship of the Egyptian sun god Amun. Close neighbors. Nubia and Egypt had an uneasy relationship. Sometimes they were at war. At other times, they were part of the same empire. In 2003, a team led by Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet uncovered a ditch in an ancient temple in Sudan. It contained 7 granite statues of black pharaohs or kings of Nubia. 2 of them were of kings who had ruled both kingdoms. Bonnet compared the dates on the statues with known historical events. He concluded that the statues had been knocked down when Egyptians invaded Nubia about 590 BC. The Nubians probably buried the statues in the pit for safekeeping after the attack. Bonnet's discovery opened a new chapter in the story of what may be the world's oldest known monarchy. Pyramids in Sudan. Archaeologists had started piecing together that story in the early 19th in northern Sudan. In 1916, a team led by George A. Reisner of Harvard University began investigating pyramids there. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt. About 1400 years after the Egyptians stopped using pyramids for royal burials, a Nubian pharaoh, Pi, revived the custom. He reigned from 747 to 716 BC. Pi ruled both Nubia and Egypt, which he occurred during his reign. Reisner's team began excavating tombs at El Kuru, about 10 miles, 16 kilometers from Napata, at a Nubian king receives tribute from Egyptians. Nubia sometimes ruled and was sometimes ruled by Egypt. This bronze mirror has a handle in the form of a woman. It was found on the frontier between Egypt and Nubia at Semna. It was made between 1575 and 1000 BC. A staircase inside Pianki's tomb. Pianki was the first Nubian ruler to be buried beneath a pyramid, showing the influence of neighboring Egypt on Nubian culture. One time, the Nubian capital. The tombs had been robbed, so any treasure was gone. But they still held rich information for Reisner. He traced how burial customs had changed. The earliest tombs were rough, circular stone structures. The bodies inside were placed on beds in narrow pits. Later, tombs were square and topped with small, steep-sided pyramids. Inside the tombs, the bodies were mummified and laid in coffins. This was a typical Egyptian practice. One surprising find was a grave for 24 horses. They were buried standing up, draped in nets adorned with beads and coral shells. Nubians prized their horses highly, and so did other people in the region. Reisner found sacrificed animals in human tombs too. Reisner explored several brick monuments at Kerma, but he did not realize the importance of the site in the 1960s. Archaeologists did more work at Kerma. They found artifacts which showed that Nubia had an advanced political organization in 3300 BC, earlier than the first recorded Egyptian king. In 1973, Charles Bonnet led another team that excavated at Kerma. The ruins showed that it was a large city by 2000 BC. That makes Kerma, along with early cities in Egypt and Mesopotamia, one of the oldest urban centers in the world. By the 1970s, archaeologists were also focusing on Napata. This city was the Nubian capital for nearly 1,000 years. Its location near the Egyptian border made it a major center for storing various trade goods for overland shipment. While Egypt sent its cloth and other goods south, the Egyptians prized trade goods from southern Africa: ebony, animal skins, ivory, frankincense, incense, myrrh, and gold. Royal tombs. About 10 miles, 16 kilometers upstream from Napata stands Nuri, a rich Nubian graveyard. Pyramids mark the royal tombs of 20 Nubian kings and 54 queens. The tombs had chambers cut into the bedrock. They were decorated with scenes from the Egyptian Book of the Dead to help the dead ruler in the afterlife. On the eastern sides of the pyramids, facing the direction of the sunrise, people made offerings to the dead rulers in small chapels. A great pharaoh. The largest pyramid at Nuri belonged to Taharqa, the greatest Nubian pharaoh. He reigned from 690 to 664 BC. Taharqa ruled Egypt until the Assyrians invaded and drove him south to Napata. He was known for his great building projects. With these, he hoped to restore Egypt's glory. Taharqa Tahakwa's pyramid had a sandstone shell enclosing an inner structure. It stood about 260 feet, 75 meters high and 171 feet, 52 meters on each side. The huge burial chamber had columns carved from the rock and was highly decorated. The floor was deliberately flooded. Tahakwa's coffin lay on a fancy meeting you hear. In 2000, a curator at a museum in Southampton, England, was talking with two Egyptologists when she recalled a statue in the basement. When she got the 27-inch, 60 centimeters piece, the visitors agreed that it might be important, but they did not realize how important. Experts now believe the 2,700-year-old sculpture depicts Tahakwa, the most powerful Nubian king. An old receipt revealed that the statue was a gift from Mr. Williams, but called the work an Egyptian figure. Decades ago, experts did not realize that Egypt and Nubia were separate kingdoms. In such cases, an important role of archaeology is to undo the careless mistakes of the past. This brick structure located next to a rocky outcrop at Kerma turned out to be a fortress. There are 74 pyramids in the Nubian graveyard at Nuri. Many have crumbled over the centuries. This one is the best preserved. Raised platform in the center. This is how the Nubians imagined their creator god had emerged from the waters at the beginning of time. Looters broke into the tomb in the 18s, but archaeologists still found more than 1,200 short abtis, figures to serve the king after his death. Words inscribed on each figure express its readiness to perform duties in the land of the dead. The Shawa bits combined Nubian facial features with the form of an Egyptian mummy. Political center. Tahakwa's pyramid lay within sight of Jebel Bakal, near Napata. Its tip marked the spot where the sun rose on the ancient Egyptian New Year's Day when seen from Jebel Bakal. Beneath the peak stood a temple to Amun, an Egyptian god that the Nubians had adopted as their man-god. Jebel Bakal clearly had great spiritual and political meaning. Timothy Kendall began working in Napata in 1986 with a team from the University of Rome. They found evidence of a rich city with temples decorated by fine craftsmen. These temples held sacred statues, objects, and writings on papyrus, a form of paper made from reeds. One find was a large granite statue of Tahakwa wearing a cap with two wearing cabras. The team excavated the temple complex, recorded inscriptions, and carefully noted each carving. They also mapped the ancient city. To do this, they studied photographs and drawings of the individual buildings. They also did an aerial survey. This means they took a series of photographs of the city from an airplane. A magic snake. Kendall was fascinated by Jebel Bakal, especially after he climbed its peak. He wondered how a rock formation could have energized an empire. Near the top of the mountain, he found a hollowed-out place. Kendall guessed it once held a statue of Tahakwa. He thought that Jebel Bakal might have strengthened the king's political power in some way. Jebel Bakal's shape may have made it powerful. From the side, it resembles a huge crown. Its rock spire stands at the front like a uraeus, the varying cobra emblem worn by the pharaoh on its crown. The cobra was a sign of a protective goddess. Perhaps the Nubians believed that Jebel Bakr helped to guard their capital, Napata. Jebel Bakr remained the Nubian spiritual center even after 200 BC, when Nubian rulers moved south to avoid Egyptian troops. The rulers returned there for ceremonies until their kingdom fell about 200 years later. Nubia did manage to last longer, however, than its old rival Egypt, which was overrun by Persia and then the Greeks, followed by Rome. This Nubian bronze container has Egyptian images and hieroglyphics. Computers show what might have been. Computers are useful to archaeologists in many ways, including showing how ruined structures might once have looked. Archaeologists used computers to create an image of the temple at Jebel Bakr. For example, surveyors measured the temple courtyard, which was buried under 5 feet, 1.5 meters of sand. They gathered information from other Nubian temples that are still standing. Using all this information, they drew up a design. Then, they produced an image of the courtyard and temple as those structures might have appeared 2,500 years ago. There is a lot of guesswork involved. However, images produced in such a way can be helpful, even if there is no way to know exactly how close to real they are. Sphinxes, lions with human heads, guard the ancient entrance to a temple near the rocky outcrop of Jebel Bakr.